All right. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this week's edition of Boundaries Webinar Wednesdays. My name is Shayi Shimbora, and I'll be taking you through today's webinar. Um, so just first off, starting off with just some quick housekeeping. If everyone can see me and all can see my screen, so the PowerPoint slide with the rendering with Keyshot, and also can hear me clearly, can you please raise your hand on the GoToWebinar control panel on the right, just so that way I can confirm that everyone coming through loud and clear. Okay, yep, I see a few people raising their hands, so that's good. Yep, I'll go ahead and bump those hands down. Thanks for that. Okay, so we'll probably give it a couple more minutes for a few more people to jump on here before we go ahead and dive into the content. So, yeah. So we'll just hang tight for a second here. All right, we'll go ahead and just jump in and get started. Now again, by way of housekeeping, so for all of you attendees, you're currently muted. There's a go to webinar control panel on the right hand side of your screen, where there's a section in there for questions, and so if you have any questions, you can type them in there. I will get those questions here, and we'll try and review as many as we can on air, and any questions that we can't review on air, we can get to afterwards, and we'll directly follow up with you one-on-one. Now, another housekeeping before we jump in. So this webinar is going to be recorded, and afterwards our marketing department will upload the recording to YouTube, and then send out the link to everyone. And then next off is this particular webinar is one of our highest attendance webinars so far. And so for me, what that tells me is there's a lot of interest in this topic, and probably people either A, don't know how to render with Keyshot, or B, do have Keyshot and have some questions about usability, and how to actually get good renders out of it. And so if you have any one of those, you can type in your questions in the questions pane of the GoToWebinar control panel. You don't have to wait until the end to do that. And even if you just have a comment, like, I don't know, I'm new to rendering, I don't even know what rendering is, you can just type it in there. Even though that's not a question, that's feedback that we cherish, and we can go back, and communicate with you and talk one-on-one about, what your specific comments are, or what your point of view is coming into this webinar. All right, so we'll start off here with just a quick introduction. So on the agenda today, we'll do an intro of who we are, Boundary Systems. We'll talk a little bit about Keyshot and some of the main features, and then we'll jump into a live demonstration of Keyshot, and then we'll wrap it up with a Q&A at the end. All right, so we are Boundary Systems. We are a product development consulting firm. We're based out of Cleveland, Ohio, but really we have a span and a reach that encompasses, much more than just Cleveland. Really, any states that touch Ohio, and even beyond that, I would say technically nationwide in the U.S. and also in Canada as well. We have customers that we consult with in the areas of product lifecycle management, CAD data management. Sometimes we help do some design work for them, some CAD design work. We do a lot of simulation work as well. And really just helping our customers, produce new products and get to, higher levels of success. All right, so Keyshot. So Keyshot at its core is a photorealistic rendering software, right? That basically allows you to generate renders from non-physical objects, right? So in other words, in this case, our primary audience for this webinar will be CAD design engineers. So you're starting off with a CAD model from a CAD package, probably like, I don't know, CATIA or NX or UG or Inventor or SolidWorks or Creo, which is what we use here primarily at Boundary Systems. You're starting off with a CAD model from one of those, right? And typically, the need to generate a render comes in a couple different flavors. Sometimes I don't know, you say, for example, it's pre-sales, right? You're showing, you want to get an idea of your concept into the hands of your customer when they've asked for an RFP, for example, right? So you want to get an idea to them to say, here's our proposed solution to your RFP, and if you select us, this is how your eventual design is going to look like, right? Or sometimes it's a case where you've already, designed the model, you're already finished with the design, and in order to market that design, you have to wait for a couple things. You either have to, spend thousands of dollars waiting for manufacturing to get up to speed and actually run their first batch of product, and then take that product off the line, assemble it together, put it in a room, hire a photographer for a day, set up the room like a photographer's studio, and then take marketing pictures of your designs there. Or you could take your existing Creo models, pull them into Keyshot, and basically, quote unquote, set up your own virtual photographer scene, right? And that's what Keyshot allows you to do. So really, it saves you all that time of not having to wait for manufacturing to produce product before you can start to render, to generate your marketing collateral. It saves you all the money of having to spend towards setting everything up and getting a photographer and all of that, and really just allows you to create very, very nice, really realistic renders right there from your computer, right? Yeah, and so the next couple of slides, really, we're just taking a look at some example Keyshot renders that were created. These were, I think, created from, I guess, based off of a rendering competition that Luxion had on their website. Yeah. Yeah, and as you can see, it's a software that allows you to combine many different powerful things, everything from materials and how they reflect light or how they interact with light, to the environment that you're rendering in, and also positioning your camera angles in correct spots so that way you can maximize the effect of the light as it bounces off of your objects. And so really, it's a very, very powerful tool. And not only can you do that, but you can also then start to play with materials as well. So in this particular render compared to the other ones, this is rendered out of all one material, and you'll notice how it changes the look of it. It's probably not reality. It's probably more so conceptual, but it's a very, very good marketing collateral to where you can take that and people start to get a very clear idea of what your product is and what you're trying to communicate. Right? All right. So some of the features or highlights about Keyshot that really make it incredibly great to use are that it's a CPU based render. So first off, that means it's not limited by your graphics card in any way. So it's not a case of buying a beefier or bigger graphics card. Really, what Keyshot primarily uses are the CPU cores of your machine. The more cores you have, the faster Keyshot renders. And the other thing about it is it's pretty much linear in scale. So, if a good quality render takes you, I don't know, say for example, takes you 20 minutes on a 2-core machine, with 4 cores, it'll take 10 minutes. With 8 cores, it'll take 5 minutes. With 16 cores, it'll take 2.5 minutes, right? So all of a sudden, you begin to see how with just scaling the CPU cores of your machine, you can dramatically improve your render performance, right? Now, not only that, but Keyshot is built or created for typically, I would say, the design engineer audience, right? So people that don't necessarily have a background in industrial design or things like that. Now, this is not to say that ID people or CG artists can't use Keyshot. There's absolutely an audience for that. But I would say it's easy enough for the design engineer to use, to where we're just used to building blocky shapes and we just want to make them look nice, right? And Keyshot is easy enough for that audience to where you don't have to learn a ton of high sounding lingo and understand many different ethereal concepts in order to even be functional with it. And then not only that, it's also incredibly robust. Keyshot handles tons of different geometries, and really, I think I've probably imported an assembly with at least a couple thousand parts into Keyshot, and Keyshot handles it just fine. And so it's very, very robust. You don't have to worry about starting a render and then Keyshot having to crash, and then you have to set up your work all over again. Keyshot is really, really robust in that in that aspect. And then next up is that there's seamless integration with many different CAD packages. So with Creo, NX, SolidWorks, many other CAD packages, Keyshot either has the ability to import the native CAD file, or Keyshot has already built in plugins with existing CAD software. So that way, from your CAD software, you can just export and it'll automatically create a Keyshot session out of that. So again, that means you're spending less time, exporting, to a step or to an IGES or to another, neutral CAD format. And that also means you're spending less time fixing import issues, right? So, a surface doesn't come in cleanly, or you're missing a facet, or all those different import issues. You're spending, basically no time dealing with that, and you're going immediately from your CAD design straight to your render in this case. And then the other benefits for the other features up there basically mean that because it's a CPU based render, you can shorten your render time really just by optimizing your CPU performance. You can dramatically shorten your render time, which means you're getting to market much faster. You're getting your marketing collateral there much quicker. Not only that, but Keyshot also has a what's it called? Enterprise or distributed based rendering. So in other words, instead of using the CPU cores from one machine, if we have a company of, I don't know, 30, 40, 50 people, each person with their own computer, Keyshot can effectively distribute the rendering work across all 20, 30, 40, 50 computers, right? And then in that case, you can you can take down much bigger rendering jobs, much easier. So again, you're saving a lot of time by simply scaling your work to generate your renders much quicker. It's incredibly easy to use, and so it generates renders in minutes for the average design engineer. And it's very robust, so you don't have to worry about the software crashing or having to handle complex geometry or large assemblies. All right, so at this point I'll pause here and switch over to a live demonstration of the software. All right, so I mentioned I'll switch over to a live demonstration of Keyshot, and then I opened up Creo Parametric, right? So we'll start with Creo, and then we'll work our way into Keyshot. Now, from here inside of Creo, what I have is just a tire, or I guess a wheel assembly, complete with some lug nuts and what's it called, a brake rotor over here, or I guess not, sorry, a brake disc with a rotor and a spindle. And the rim, right? So fairly basic tire assembly, right? Now, working in Keyshot actually starts, or I guess I'll say begins, from outside of Keyshot. And some of the things you would want to do or pay attention to from outside of Keyshot would be the fact that, first off, if you want to have if you want to have on one object, or I guess I'll say on one part, if you want to have different areas to have different colors, so say for example inside of Keyshot, if I wanted to render this model check writing over here, this is basically, if I open this part, that model check writing over there is basically an extruded offset right over here. So it's solid material, right? If I want to render that with its own color inside of Keyshot, the easiest way to do that would be to give that particular writing a different color inside of Creo, right? Or to copy and paste that surface as its own individual surface, right? In this case, that has a different color compared to the base model. So even though all of this is one part, everything will import to Keyshot, and Keyshot will understand that you want to potentially, give this over here a different color compared to, the tire itself, right? And so that's one thing I usually advise people to do, is to start off there, right? Just so that way you don't have a case where, Keyshot assumes everything is going to be one material, and then you realize, oh, I actually want to place, a different color onto this engraved text over here, for example, right? And then next up is that with rendering, you also want to you want to round off as many sharp edges as you can, right? And this is one pitfall that a lot of design engineers get into, is that you can create your CAD model, you can create a square, and the square just looks like, or a cube, and a cube just looks like a cube. And usually it'll have sharp edges, right? Because mathematically, quote unquote, it's perfect, right? But you never have in reality any mathematically perfectly sharp entity in reality. There's always going to be some tiny radius in there, no matter how sharp it is, right? And that means that radius there will reflect light slightly differently. And so in reality then, for Keyshot, you want to make sure that you round off as many sharp edges as you can, so that way you're getting a much more realistic light appearance off of your object, compared to if you just had perfectly sharp edges, and in that case it'll look more artificial or more fake. So for example, in this case, you'll notice a lot of these curves on the rim are all rounded off, right? Which is exactly what we want to do, right? All right, now next up in here, we'll say, for example, so we'll say we want to export this to Keyshot, and it's very easy to do that. So all we'll do in this case is under let's see, under our render tab inside of Creo, there's a Keyshot plugin, right, that I mentioned. Keyshot already builds a plugin with many existing CAD packages. And so with that Keyshot plugin, I can basically easily export my Creo model to Keyshot. So I'll start off here and say I'll give it a tessellation level of say I'll give it 0.4, and I will just say let's go ahead and render. And if you're probably asking or wondering, what the tessellation level there means, basically when Keyshot is exporting your model, you can imagine the tessellation level as something basically similar to creating an STL file, right, where it tessellates and generates many small triangles. Likewise with Keyshot, that's what it's doing as well. So in the same way with an STL file, if you're using flat triangles to represent a curved surface, the more triangles you have, the more you're accurately able to capture that curve, right, compared to fewer triangles. And so in this case, I knew I have a lot of round or curved surfaces on this model, and so I want to make sure that that curvature is accurately taken into account when I get it into Keyshot. All right. So let's see here. Go ahead and start this off here with the render, and I'll close out of here, and I'll switch screens here so I can show you the Keyshot on my second screen here. All right. So right now you'll notice I have Keyshot open, and Keyshot basically imported the entire assembly that I have in here. And so now I can say I can go ahead and start setting this up just like usual. And to start off, I'll say, for example, I want this, so I didn't import this as I wanted to. I wanted this to import so that way it's standing on its side. But again, that's no problem, because I can very easily come in here and say, let's see, come to my model here. Under the position tab, I can activate the move tool. And now this allows me to basically manipulate the position of this object in any way I want. So I can say, hey, let's stand it on its side like that, right? And you'll notice as I'm changing this here, these values in the translation, rotation, and scale dialog box here are also changing as well, right? So I can either dynamically move it from here, or I can say, hey, let's rotate that exactly to 90 degrees, right? I can also say I want to rotate it like that, so I can look straight into it, and I'll also raise that model check label maybe over to like this location or something, right? And then finally I'll say I want to snap it to ground, so that way it's flush with the ground plane. And once I'm done, I'll say okay, right? Now I just position this model exactly where I want it to be, right? Now inside of Keyshot, in general, let's see, so next step will be to start applying materials to this here. And so when it comes to materials, we can do a couple of things. So say, for example, for my materials, yeah, I'll come over to my materials tab over here, and I can either search for materials, or I can, look through a specific drop down. So for example, I could say, I want to look for, can't find my miscellaneous, yep, yeah, miscellaneous drop down. I can pick from, any bunch of materials here, or from my plastic, materials. Or in this case, what I'll do is, yeah, that's what I want, just a tire material, and we'll just drag and drop that on. And that's the other feature about Keyshot as well, is that it generates the renders in real time. So as soon as you drop it on there, it starts to render and res up the image to show you what the final output would look like, right? And so that means you're spending less time, setting up, putting your material on, hitting render, and then you see that you don't like the preview you get. In this case, it starts to res up immediately, right? Now let's say let's go look for chrome material for the rims over here. So I'll say I want I'll say I want a black chrome for the rims, like that. And then I'll say what else? So say for the for my lug nuts, I'll start off with, let's see, I can start off with this material for my lug nut, and actually no, for my brake disc in the middle there, and I probably will will change it from there. My lug nut is just going to be steel. Steel, I'll say that's going to be steel. And then let's see, I'll look for yep. So I'll just get an anodized blue material for the cap in the middle there, and yeah, now I have have a lot of these models set up with materials already. Now, if I want to go ahead and continue to refine this, I'll start off here with say, for example, my tire material. In this case, let's see, if I want to give this a more realistic look or appearance to it, actually, hold on, before I talk about materials, what I'll do here is I will I'll go over and talk about my resolution for a second. With Keyshot, what you want to do is your resolution affects, so basically your resolution is what the final output is that you want to render, right? But also your resolution affects how fast Keyshot is able to generate the real-time render. So typically what we usually recommend is, say for example, my final output render is going to be a 1080 1920 by 1080 render resolution. If I want it, while I'm setting it up, I can go for a screen that's smaller than that. So say for example 720 by 480, right? That means that Keyshot is able to render fewer pixels much quicker, right? So your real-time render will even be faster. And then once you're ready to get out your final render, you can then go ahead and bump it back up to your 1920 by 1080 render that you're looking for before you go ahead and do that, right? Now in this case, for me, what I'll do is I'll come over here and say for my tire, right now it just looks perfectly smooth. But we'll go ahead and apply a couple of textures to it. So first off, I'll say I want a specular texture. And in this case, I'll get a fractal. And let's see here. So yeah, noise fractal, and I'll say I want to say I'll bump down the scale even more, and then I'll also apply that what's it called, texture to the bump. So that way it'll give it a very faint idea of it being bumped or raised. Now with textures, I'll explain what textures are doing. So textures are basically small or micro level variations in your material that you really can't model in, right? So if you have very tiny surface bumps on your model, you really can't model those into your CAD package. That would be very expensive computationally. And so the easiest way to do that is to use a texture to capture that. And in general, the better textures to use, depending on what you're trying to get, would be your 3D procedural textures. And so in that case, we'll just pick the noise fractal there, and we'll go with that one. Yeah. All right. And if I want it to say if I want it to reflect more or less light depending on how the bumps are, I can also tweak the brightness in here as well. So right now I'll leave it as is, and let's see here. Okay, so another thing you can do with Keyshot is you can also, when you're choosing colors, there's an automatic color picker that allows you to choose colors based on any existing I guess you'd say image or object you have. So for example, in this case, say for example this model check label over here, I want that to have the color of our boundary themed logo, right? So what I'll do is I'll come over here to colors. Or actually, no, I'll pick on this guy over here. Nope. So let's see. Yep. So pick on that color over here, and under the diffuse, that's going to be the color, and so that's what I'm going to set. And there's this eyedrop picker over here on the right. And if you pick on that, you can mouse over any color and select it, and Keyshot will basically replicate that exact color where your mouse is, right? So if I wanted to replicate this gray or this jasmine over here, I could do that. And it just doesn't have to be inside of Keyshot. So I can move my mouse out of Keyshot onto our boundary logo page over here and say, hey, I want to replicate this blue color over here, right? And Keyshot is able to replicate that and say, okay, that's the color you're looking for, for that particular blue logo. I can say okay, and now that has a bluish boundary tint to it, right? So yeah, I just show that because sometimes people are trying to match a particular color exactly, and it's one thing to eyeball it and have to move sliders back and forth. It's another thing to just pick on your eyedrop picker and select that color immediately. All right. Next up in here, I'll say is we'll come over to my Chrome rims over here. Now, this is one of the typically this is one of the things that a lot of new people do that you typically don't want to do with Keyshot. It's that any material. So the roughness over here is a measure of how much light is scattered on a material, and any material in reality always has some roughness to it. So in general, there are variations of that. For example, a concrete floor is much, much rougher than a mirror, right? So if I was rendering something with a concrete floor, I would bump up my roughness real high. But even if I was rendering a mirror, I would never have a roughness of perfectly zero, right? It would be very small, right, admittedly, but it won't be zero. And so in order to give your model some realism, that's also something you want to do as well, is you want to add some roughness to it. And you'll notice the more the roughness, the less defined the reflection is on that object. So if I go like that, for example, you'll notice now I'm barely having any reflection. A lot of that light is scattered. None of it is coming back to me at the camera, compared to if I have a smaller reflection. So in this case, for chrome material, I do want it to be somewhat shiny, but I don't want it to be perfectly zero reflection. And then let's see here. Next up, I'll say I want my what's it called? My brake rotor in the middle right here. So I'll say let's see here. Say show only. So this is just what I want to see. And for in this case here, what I want to get is so sort of that spirally effect that you typically see on a brake rotor, almost like a record player, and how it has the semicircular, the rings coming outward from that. That's the effect I want to get on this. And in order for me to do that, so say for example, I'll come over here to my material. And again, obviously, I don't want to have a roughness of perfectly zero. I'll bump that up a little bit. My rotor will still be somewhat shiny. And for my textures here, I won't apply that. So that way it's just going to give me a dull, just a base color like that. For my bump, what I want to have is a radial texture. So I'll say a brushed radial like that. And let's see. And okay. And we'll say let's bump this up a little bit like that. Yep. Yeah. And now you can begin to see how you can see very cylindrical what's it called, lines along that object, right? That's the texture you're sort of going for. Now in this case, I want a lot of it over here, and I want it to be slightly more pronounced. So in this case, in this case, I'll come over here and apply that to my bump instead. I'll turn off the current bump, and what I'll do is I'll apply the same texture that's for the color onto the bump as well. And the bump texture basically allows you to how do you see it? It basically takes light values and interprets them as mountains, and dark values and interprets them as valleys. So that way it sort of gives you the reflection, the illusion of like light being reflected, based on certain areas being bumped or raised compared to other areas, right? And so like this here, you can very easily start to create that look of the brake rotor having those radial outward patterns on it. Let's see, I may probably bump that up a little bit more. Okay, yeah, and we'll call it good there. Yep. So now we'll come out of here, show all parts. Yep. And then let's see. So next up is, I will say, let's see, what do I want to hit next? We'll talk about the environment. Yeah. And so with the environment, typically what you have is, I'll just talk a little bit about the environment and colors, and then I'll jump straight into the render. So in this case, for the environment, the light panel, so the HDRI you have is what generates the lighting. So in this case, I have this 3-panel straight HDRI, and so that's what's generating my lighting for me around my scene, right? And you can switch that to whatever HDRI you prefer. In this case, I'll just leave it as is over here. And then, so Keyshot has a very easy way for you to render, not just with the environment here. If you notice, the environment itself was not made for you to create as a final render. You'll notice how sort of grainy and pixelated it is over here. The only function of the environment, or the HDRI, is to generate lighting, right? If you want to create a final render, a very easy way for you to create a render that's just based off of a static, black or white background, is to use under the background here, to use the color selection. Now this is just going to render it with just the white background, reflecting off of it there, right? All right. And then next up is talking about generating the render, and for that, you can then go ahead and say, for example, we'll come over here and tweak our perspective first. A lot of product photography is typically shot at about a 70-75 millimeter lens, and so we'll switch that perspective so that way it gives us a more realistic look to it. And then we'll come over and say we want to render, and and so in this case, so we can specify what we want to render to. We'll say I want to get a PNG out of this here. That's my resolution that I want. And let's see here. Under options, I'll say I want a maximum samples render. And in general, maximum samples is what you, depending on what you want to do, you want to go for maximum samples. And samples of about, 16 is decent. 32 is really, really good. If you want to go overkill, maybe you go 60, 64 or something like that. But usually you don't want to have a case where, the samples, you want to put like 500 over there for the samples. That's really just going to be a lot of overkill. And so in this case, I'll say I'll put, 32, for example. And then I'll go ahead and hit render. Okay, so no, let's see, I'll just give it, I'll just give it a new name here. I'll say 220, for example. We'll say let's render that. And now Keyshot will pull out a new sub window and start to render, that object there. And so again, you'll notice, this, looks a far cry from the original CAD model that I had, where I just had that, in my Creo. In this case, this looks, way more realistic. We can start to, put this on some poster somewhere and show customers, hey, this is what your object is going to look like, right? So from start to finish, that sort of encompasses, Keyshot and setting up your materials and everything with rendering. Now, obviously, there are way more buttons and way more detail than I just covered in a 30-minute demo on a webinar. And so if that's something where you need, more of, you can, we have training classes, for Keyshot that you can sign up for as well. But again, it's impossible to cover the entire software in just a 30-minute demo on a webinar. So at this point, we'll open it up here for questions. So let's take a look at some of the questions we have in here. Okay. So one of the questions in Keyshot, so one of the questions here says, are there any issues with surface models in Keyshot rendering? And I assume that's asking about if I have a quilt from inside of Creo, so basically a non-solid 3D, a non-solid quilt model. Are there any issues with it inside of Keyshot rendering? No, there are no issues with it. Keyshot will treat it and visualize it just like Creo does, just like a quilt with no thickness at all to it, and you can still apply materials or colors to that quilt. And in fact, sometimes, say for example, over here, if I wanted to get that model check raised text to have a to apply a different material to it. In this example, I did it by changing the color of that raised surface over there. I could also do it by copying and pasting the surface on itself. And in that case, that would be, again, a surface quilt, and I could still apply a material onto that inside of Keyshot. Okay. Next up, someone asked, is there a way to use Keyshot as a license or module for the plugin? Not sure that I'm understanding what that question is about. So if you could type in a clarification there, I'll be able to respond to that one. Next question in here says, is there an assembly model tree in Keyshot where colors can be assigned to parts instead of drag and drop on screen? I'm not sure what you mean by assembly model tree. But really, they're only, so the ways you would apply materials to Keyshot on screen would be a couple different ways. So one would be, let's see here, I'll come over to my materials tab. So 90% of the time you're using your materials section over here inside of your library, and again, typically you're dragging and dropping onto the object, right? And the other way that you can typically do that would be to create what's called a material template. So if I come over here, yeah, can't find the option right now. But there's a way you can create a material-based template. That basically means, you could say, for example, map it out ahead of time to say any part that you import in with a name, tire gets this material. Any part that you import in with a name, rim gets this other material. So if you're a tire manufacturer and you do this, very frequently, you can set that material template once, and then for your, every other render you generate, once you import the model in, Keyshot analyzes the name structure and says, okay, this model here has a name tire on it. I'm just going to automatically pop on this material onto that. Yep. Let's see here, which other questions are there? Okay, so another question over here says, could you show how to reorient the object again? Yes, I can do that. So if I come over here, here, yeah, so that's going to be under your Scene tab, and you select on the model that you want to reorient in your under the Parts and Models group, and yeah, and then you go into the Position tab over here at the bottom, and that's where you can then either type in specific values in here to translate in the X, Y, or Z direction, or rotate, or to scale it up or down. Or you can pick on the Move tool over here to do that. Now, just a quick tip: if you don't know what's your X, Y, or Z direction in Keyshot, a very easy way to figure that out is to tap on the Z key, and Z will pull out your coordinate legend at the bottom left corner. And now this shows you, where your X or your Y or your Z is. And so now I can come over here and say Position tool. I can either type in values here, or I can just pick on my Move tool. And with my Move tool, I can select if I want to, say for example, rotate this, right? Or if I want to translate the model, right? So like that. Or even if I want to scale it up or down as well, I could do that from here. But yeah, so moving and reorienting the model would be from here. So if I wanted to lay it back down on its side, I would probably do something like this, right? And then snap it to ground, right? So yeah. Okay. Next would be, let's see here. Is there a way to spin the screen without it being locked on center? Okay, I see what you're, okay, I think that's probably coming from a Creo question where you can change your spin center or turn off your spin center. So for that, no, you can't. So the way you want to imagine Keyshot is, so Keyshot is like, the way I like to sort of describe Keyshot is, if I zoom all the way out of it, so this is what I have. It's basically your environment, your HDRI is basically a sphere, right? And you want to imagine that in Keyshot, your camera is the Earth, and the object you have is the sun, right? So in reality, the sun is stationary at the center of the solar system, and the Earth moves around the sun in a spherical fashion, right? And that's exactly what's going on in here as well. So your camera will always move around your object in a spherical fashion, right? But the center point of your object is always going to be stationary, and if you zoom in close enough, Keyshot is always going to aim for that center point, right? Now, what you can do is, say for example, right now, Keyshot is aiming for the center of this model, right? If I want to focus on something else, say for example, I want to focus on getting my materials right over here where this label is. One of the things I can do is I can right click over here, and there's this option here that says look at, right? That will set that point as my new quote-unquote sun, right? And so now any way I rotate my model, it's rotating about that particular point that I just selected as my look at point. And so if I want to, I don't know, get my finishes here on the rotor just right, I can right click on that, and say look at. And now, I zoom in and it's zooming in on that particular section, right? And so when it comes to, orienting your model in Keyshot, that is usually what helps with that. But yeah, there's no way to completely have it not be locked on center. It'll be locked on something, and you can change what it's locked onto. Okay. So someone asked, is there a way to spin the screen without it being locked on center? Is there a way to spin the screen without it being locked on center? Yes. So for that, what you can do is actually, no, sorry. I just answered that question. Oh yeah, is there a quicker way to add color to multiple pieces at once instead of just dragging and dropping on one piece at a time? Yes, you could do that a couple different ways. One is if you import a model from Creo, all the models that have the same name will basically get the same material. So for example, I have one lug nut here. If I had 5 of those, patterned in those bolt holes, all I would do is have to apply the material on one, and Keyshot would automatically apply it to all the other 4 because it understands they're all the same model. If I want to copy the same exact material to another model, I can easily do that by what's it called? I can hold Shift and left click to copy, and then I hold Shift and right click to paste a linked material, right? And a linked material basically means now if I change this one material definition, both of these objects will change their material look as well as a result. So I can hold Shift and right click now, that is linked, Shift and right click. And so that's an easy way to just go ahead and pop the same material on many different parts. And someone also asked, is there a way for you to save colors with a new name, or I guess save materials with a new name? Yes, the answer for that is yes. So for example, in this case, I'll take this what I applied to the rotor over here. So I changed the color, right? I added some roughness. I changed the bump and the diffuse color texture. If I want to save all of this, I can, let's see. I think my go-to meeting. Yeah, I can pick on this save to library right over here, right? And that will it'll pull out a name dialog box. I can type a name and I can save it to my library over here. And so now I'll have that in my library here. The other thing I can do is I can also pick on any material that I for example like to use quite often. I can right click over here and I can say let's add it to favorite, right? And in your favorite section, oh yeah, favorites is right over here. It's the very last tab. And favorites has many different sections. So you can create a new folder and just add it in there. So that way now when you come to favorites, you can just have just your favorite textures or materials or colors in there, and then you can just easily apply those onto your objects. Cool. It's already 12:30 right now, and I know you mentioned the webinar was going to be from 11:30 to 12:30. So we'll go ahead and stop the Q&A session right here. Any other remaining questions, we will go ahead and answer after the webinar. I'll follow up with each of the attendees by email. So just as sort of a wrap up over here, let's see, so our contact information is up on the screen. If you have any other questions or comments about Keyshot, you can go ahead and email me on the screen over there. If you have any inquiries about maybe potentially getting trained on Keyshot or any other sales questions, anything that has to do with the dollar amount, that would go to our sales team, and that's headed by Steve Seymour. Anyway, aside from that, thank you so very much for attending today's webinar. It was really great having all of you on here, and we look forward to having you on a future Boundary Webinar Wednesday. Thank you.